Now, the economic freedom fighters marched to the French embassy in Johannesburg on Africa Day this past Wednesday to hand over a memorandum of demands. They demanded that France immediately withdraw all its military bases on the continent and grant full independence to all African countries. The EFF has said African countries should be allowed to determine their own currencies, monetary policies and economic direction. Ambassador Aurélien Lechevallier received the memorandum but told the party that the embassy was not in a position to sign it as it undermined the long-standing relationship between France and South Africa. The EFF has given France 7 days to respond. For more on this, we're joined by French Ambassador to South Africa, Aurélien Lechevallier. Ambassador, thank you so much for your time. And thank you for joining us this morning. I think perhaps just take us through your response to some of the complaints and criticisms that were expressed by demonstrators on Wednesday.
Thank you very much and good morning. It's great to be here with you this morning. Look, there is a long list of demands regarding France and the role that we are supposed to play in Africa, but I don't really know where it comes from. It seems that the EFF or the groups behind the EFF are putting all the blame on France for, all the problems in Africa and the world in general, the social problem, the economic problem, the monetary problems. But as long as we see it, France is a good partner of Africa. We work very well with African nations, and we respect the sovereignty and the independence of the African countries. So we don't know yet how we will respond. We respect the EFF as a political movement, but I mean, this is just not true.
All right, Ambassador. Well, let's go through some of the concerns that were listed as grievances in the memorandum. One of those being the call for the use of the franc currency in a number of West African countries to no longer be used, i.e. essentially allowing some of these African countries to be more financially, economically independent, to create their own reserve or central banks, and to create their own monetary policy. So that's something very tangible that France can actually respond to, the removal of the French currency in some of these African countries. Do we know if there's any progress with regards to that? Do we know if there's any pending discussions between France and some of these African countries to give them that sort of independence?
Yes, you're right. This is very tangible, and we will respond to that because actually there was already a big change and a big transformation. After President Macron was elected in 2017, he decided to change this because he knew that this franc CFA, the currency used in most of the Francophone countries, was becoming a problem for the population in terms of a symbol, and they wanted more autonomy and independence. So the reform already took place. The central banks of the African nations are taking control. There are no more French observers in the different meetings of this currency, and it's already done as an independent currency. We even changed the name actually of the currency. So this is a bit outdated.
All right, noted. Another of the concerns raised by the EFF was France's military operations on the continent and a number of conflicts in Africa. We know in the Sahel region, for instance, France has deployed quite a number of troops to try and bring some sort of stabilization to that region. The issue raised is how long French troops have been on the ground. Now, we recently saw last year, in fact, the devastation that was brought on by the withdrawal of U.S. troops out of Afghanistan because of a protracted stay of troops in that area. So you can understand the concerns raised around what's happening in military operations that are being run by France on the African continent. Where are we in terms of France's conversations with a lot of these regional heads or African states with regards to quelling a lot of the conflict we're seeing and perhaps seeing France finally move out of those regions?
No, absolutely, you're right. It's a question, it's a concern, including for the French people, actually, because, it's not neutral to send young soldiers risking their lives in another country. So for the French people also, they deserve responses. I think this grievance or demand from the EFF comes from the junta, the military people who seized the power in Bamako, Mali. They are supported, as we know, by Russia now, and it's the only country where we have this kind of problem right now, because it's too dangerous or complicated to work with the Malian regime at the moment. But other than that, when French soldiers are deployed in Africa, either through bilateral agreement or with the United Nations or with the African soldiers, it's always under the request of the African government. There is no forcing, there is no imposing, there is always a legal demand or request from the legitimate authorities in Africa to be supported by the French military forces. Otherwise, we would not be in Africa in the different places. So that's the policy right now. Maybe it was different in the past, but today it's really respectful and it's a partnership.
But I suppose you're right in saying that if a country has agreed to allow French troops to enter its sovereign state, then I suppose that should be answer enough to the EFF. The issue is that, in terms of people on the ground, there is growing dissent, there is growing criticism of this military presence. I know that there have been a number of protestations along operational routes, military operational routes, where you find citizens protesting against the presence of the military operations. Does France take any cognizance of this? Does it take any heed to some of the feelings or some of the criticisms being displayed by people on the ground?
Well, we are always ready to receive criticisms, but including for your viewers, we have to really look at the facts. These demonstrations that you're talking about, there were really, a very limited number of them. Actually, most of the people on the ground are requesting more solidarity and more cooperation with countries like France to tackle the issues of insecurity, to fight against terrorist groups. So you don't want to be manipulated by a few examples. And I would say there are mixed feelings because the situation is difficult. So part of the people are blaming, let's say, a foreign country. But others are requesting more international support. What we want to do is always work under the leadership of the African countries, if possible with African Union policy and the United Nations policy. And if there are concerns, we are always ready to answer them. But look at Mali, for example. There was a new decision, and the French soldiers and other countries, they had to remove their troops to other countries of the Sahel region. And now the situation has worsened in Mali. We have seen recent weeks more violences. And so it's not always, the simplest solution for some of the people that is good. Actually, what we think is that in Africa, cooperation is very important, and solidarity as well.
Talking about that cooperation, I know, Ambassador, when you received those lists of demands, your response at the time was that France was committed to strengthening bonds with the African continent. But given the fact that there is such a challenge, however small, to this intent that has been expressed by France, what would you say is the future of Franc-African relations, just in terms of policy and where you see those relations going?
Well, it's important to establish a very respectful framework for policy dialogue, always exchanging our ideas, our views, like for regional crises or wars like Cabo Delgado in Mozambique or Ukraine in Europe. So that's important. Also, in terms of economic relations and investments, we believe actually that Africa needs more investments coming from France and from Europe. So we are working on that. And we would like to see also more African investments in France and in Europe, so that it can be really mutual and strengthening our economic bonds. And the same with culture, with the media, with science, with innovation. We see also a great appetite, especially from the young people, to work more with France. And from the French perspective, to work more in Africa. So I think the outlook is very good. Of course, there will be always a minority of people, with reluctances or doubts, but I think we have a great avenue to move forward.
All right. That's French Ambassador to South Africa, Aurélien Lechevallier, joining us on via telephone there, just to talk to us about his response to that protest by the EFF on Thursday, marching to the French embassy in Johannesburg to hand over that list of memorandum.